A 4-year-old beggar girl is beaten with an extension cord in public, but a millionaire pulls the cord and says, "Now it's your turn." And 2 minutes later, comment. What you think will happen, your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The relentless December sun beat down on the brick pavement of Harmony Square in Harmony Creek, a small town in upstate New York where time seemed to move slower. The heat was stifling, and most people sought shade in the surrounding businesses. It was a typical summer afternoon, when the silence was usually broken only by the rumble of classic cars and the hushed conversations of retirees on park benches. But that day, a different sound cut through the oppressive air, a sound that made several people stop what they were doing and look towards its source. It was the sharp crack of something hitting something soft, followed by a high-pitched, desperate scream that echoed between the old brick buildings. Lily, a 4-year-old girl with a face smudged with dirt and bare feet, was huddled on the ground near the central fountain. Her clothes, a faded pink t-shirt and a torn blue skirt, were even dirtier now, stained with dust clinging to her sweaty skin. Her light brown hair was disheveled and plastered to her forehead by sweat and the tears that streamed silently down her cheeks. Above her, Frank Peterson, a 45-year-old man with stubble and a strong smell of alcohol, held an extension cord that he'd torn from a nearby construction site. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his bloodshot eyes betrayed not only the booze, but also an uncontrolled rage that seemed to come from some deep, dark place. "You little brat," he yelled, raising the cord again. "Begging for handouts here, bothering everyone. Didn't your grandma teach you not to annoy people?" Lily tried to protect herself with her skinny arms, but the movement only seemed to anger the man even more. The cord came down again, this time hitting her small back with a sound that made several people around wince and pretend they weren't seeing anything. At Joe's diner, 3 elderly ladies gossiped quietly amongst themselves, but none moved. At Mike's bar, the men playing dominoes glanced over and returned to their game. A woman walking by with shopping bags quickened her pace, pulling her young son by the hand. "Everyone here knows that girl's trouble," someone muttered. "Ethel can't handle her right." "Poor thing," another voice sighed. "But Frank's been drinking since early this morning. Best not to get involved." That's how things worked in Harmony Creek. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone knew everyone's problems. But when things got too ugly, it was easier to look the other way. Frank wasn't a bad person when he was sober, they said. He'd lost his job at the construction site 6 months ago. His wife had left home taking their 3 kids, and he was going through a tough time. But when he drank, he became someone else. And Lily? Well, Lily was just another kid living on the streets, the product of a complicated situation that no one liked to talk about much. Her grandmother Ethel did what she could, but at 67, collecting recyclables to survive, it wasn't easy raising a little girl. The third blow was about to fall when a deep voice cut through the air like thunder. "Drop that cord right now!" All heads turned to see where that sudden authority came from. Theodore Caldwell strode towards the center of the square with long, determined steps. At 52, he was an imposing man, with well-groomed graying hair and always neatly dressed. As the owner of Caldwell Woodworking, the town's main furniture factory, he was respected by everyone, known for his politeness and emotional control. But at that moment, there was something different about Theodore. His dark eyes shone with an intensity that no one had seen before, and his hands were clenched into fists as he approached. "I said drop that cord," he repeated, his voice echoing throughout the square. Frank turned, staggering slightly. He still held the cord, but seemed to hesitate before the approaching authoritarian figure. "It's none of your business, Ted," he mumbled. "This little brat was—" He couldn't finish the sentence. In 2 quick movements, Theodore had reached him, snatched the cord from his hands, and pushed him away from Lily with a force that surprised everyone present. "None of my business?" Theodore repeated, his voice low but filled with controlled fury. Beating a 4-year-old child isn't anyone's business. Frank stumbled and almost fell, looking at the businessman in surprise. She was bothering. She's a child, Theodore exploded, and this time his voice carried a pain that went far beyond the present situation. A child who can't defend herself. What kind of man are you? The words came out with an intensity that even made Frank take a few steps back. There was something in Theodore's voice that suggested that this wasn't just momentary outrage. It was something much deeper, something that came from a wounded place in his soul. Lily remained on the ground, trembling, but now looked at the man who had appeared out of nowhere to protect her. Her big, dark eyes were full of tears, but also of childish curiosity. Who was this man? Why had he stopped to help her when everyone always pretended she was invisible? Theodore knelt beside her, his expression changing completely. The fury gave way to a gentleness that contrasted drastically with the authority he had demonstrated seconds before. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly, examining the girl's small arms without touching her. Lily shook her head, but Theodore could see the red marks where the cord had struck her delicate skin. He could also see other older marks, some almost healed, that told a story he preferred not to imagine. For a moment time seemed to stop. Theodore looked at that small, vulnerable child, and something inside him broke and mended at the same time. It was as if he was seeing not only Lily, but also other images, other memories that he had tried to bury long ago. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice even softer. "Lily," she whispered, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Lily," Theodore repeated, and there was something in the way he said the name that made the girl stop crying. "You're going to be okay, Lily. I promise." It was a strange promise coming from a man who had just met her, but there was a sincerity in his voice that even a 4-year-old could recognize. Around the square, people began to disperse. The show was over. Frank had disappeared into the alleys, probably towards the nearest bar. Life in Harmony Creek would return to normal in a few minutes, as if nothing had happened. But for Theodore Caldwell, nothing would ever be normal again from that moment on. As he helped Lily up and carefully wiped the dirt from her face, he knew that something fundamental had changed in his life. That small, helpless girl had awakened something in him that he thought he had buried forever, a purpose that went far beyond his comfortable and predictable routine. What he didn't know yet was that this encounter would cost him much more than he could imagine. The hours following the incident in the square passed in a confusing blur for Theodore. After making sure that Lily was relatively okay, he had taken her to Ethel's house, a simple 2-room structure on the outskirts of town. The smell of mold and dampness had hit his nostrils as soon as the door opened, revealing an environment that looked more like a recycling depot than a home. Ethel Davis, at 67, was a small, wiry woman, with grey hair always tied in a messy bun. Her calloused hands and dirty nails betrayed years of hard work, collecting cans, papers and bottles on the streets of the city. When she saw Theodore standing at her door with Lily beside him, her first reaction was distrust. "What happened to her now?" she asked, drying her hands on a dirty cloth. "Frank was hitting her in the square," Theodore explained, trying to keep his voice calm. "With an extension cord." Ethel sighed heavily, as if that was just another annoyance in her difficult day. "That man turns into an animal when he drinks. Come in, Lily. Go take a bath." The girl obeyed silently, disappearing into the dark interior of the house. Theodore stood at the door, waiting for some sign that Ethel was worried or grateful for the intervention. But the woman just looked at him with that tired and resigned expression. "Thank you," she said finally, without much enthusiasm. "But you didn't need to bother. Lily's used to taking care of herself." "Used to?" Theodore repeated, feeling a new wave of indignation rise in his chest. "She's 4 years old, Mrs. Davis. She shouldn't be used to violence." "The world isn't a gentle place, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, beginning to close the door. "Especially for people like us. Better she learn that early." Theodore placed his hand on the door, preventing it from closing completely. What if I said there's a way to change that? For her, at least. Ethel stopped, studying the businessman's face with tired but sharp eyes. What are you getting at? I want to help. Financially, with education, with medical care, whatever is necessary. The distrust on Ethel's face intensified. And in exchange for what? At my age, I've learned that nobody offers anything for free, especially rich people. I don't want anything in exchange, Theodore insisted. I just want Lily to have a chance. Ethel laughed, but it was a bitter laugh without joy. I've heard that before, Mr. Caldwell. Important people promising to help, making us feel special. In the end, they just want to feel good about themselves. We become a charity project until they get tired of it. Her words cut Theodore deeper than he expected. There was truth in them, a truth he didn't want to examine too closely. Were his motives really as pure as he believed? Can I at least take her to see a doctor? He insisted. Those marks need to be examined. She already went to the clinic last week, Ethel lied, and she's fine. Theodore knew it was a lie, but he didn't want to force the situation. Not yet. Then, can I come back tomorrow? To see how she is? Ethel studied him for a few more seconds before shrugging. It's a free town, but don't expect me to change my mind about your offers. The door closed with a definitive sound, leaving Theodore alone on the dusty street. He remained there for a few minutes, watching the simple house and trying to understand why that encounter with Lily had moved him so much. The answer came like a flash of painful memory. Letitia, his daughter. At 16 she had... Theodore shook his head vigorously, pushing the thoughts away. It wasn't time to relive that. Now it was about Lily. On the way back home, he stopped by the town's police station. Chief Arnold Peterson was a man known for his practical approach and little fondness for bureaucratic complications. "Ted, what a surprise to see you here," the chief greeted, rising from his desk full of papers. "Any problems at the factory?" "No, Arnold. I came to talk about Frank Peterson. This afternoon he assaulted a child in the square, Ethel's granddaughter." The chief's face hardened slightly. "Oh, yes. I've already received some calls about that. Frank is going through a tough time, right? Lost his job, his family. That doesn't justify hitting a 4-year-old child," Theodore interrupted. "Of course not," Arnold agreed quickly. "But look, Ted, Frank isn't a criminal. He's a desperate man who lost control. And Ethel's situation with the girl isn't the best either." "What do you mean by that?" Arnold hesitated, as if weighing his words. "Well, there are rumors. Nothing confirmed, you understand. But some people comment that Ethel sometimes, well, that she doesn't take very good care of the child. Lets her run loose on the street, doesn't feed her properly. And you don't investigate." "Investigate what, Ted? Poverty isn't a crime. And Ethel is raising the girl alone, doing the best she can. If we were to take away every child who lives in precarious conditions..." Theodore felt a frustration growing in his chest. "So, you're not going to do anything? Neither with Frank nor with the girl's situation?" "I'm going to have a chat with Frank, of course, but between us, Ted, sometimes it's better to let these situations resolve themselves naturally. External intervention doesn't always help." Leaving the police station, Theodore felt even more determined. If the official system wasn't going to act, he would find another way. He spent the rest of the afternoon making calls, trying to understand what his legal options were. That's how he met Miriam Sanders, a 38-year-old social worker who worked for the city. She agreed to meet with him the next day to discuss the case. That night, Theodore barely slept. Images of Lily mingled with memories of Letitia, creating an emotional whirlwind that he couldn't control. At 3 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep and went to his home office, where he spent browsing the internet, researching children's rights and adoption procedures. It was there, in the blue light of the computer, that he made a decision that would change everything. No matter what it cost, he was going to get Lily out of that situation. And if Ethel didn't want to accept his help voluntarily, he would find a legal way to make it happen. What Theodore didn't know is that Frank Peterson was also awake that same night, sitting on the floor of his plywood shack, trying to remember exactly what had happened in the square. The images came in confusing fragments: the girl on the ground, the businessman yelling at him, the feeling of shame he had felt when he realized he was being watched by half the town. Frank wasn't a bad man. At least, he didn't used to be. Before losing his job, before Helen left taking the kids, before starting to drink every day to forget the pain, he had been a dedicated father and a respected worker. But the last few months had turned him into something he didn't recognize, and now he had beaten an innocent child in front of everyone. The shame was so intense that he felt like disappearing from the town. That's when he made a decision. The next day, he would look for Theodore Caldwell, not to ask for forgiveness. That would be too little, but to try to understand why that man had cared so much about a child who wasn't even his family. Maybe, Frank thought before finally falling asleep, there was still a chance for him to become the man he used to be. Meanwhile, in her makeshift bed in the corner of the room she shared with her grandmother, Lily slept restlessly. In her dreams, a man in a dark suit always appeared when things got scary, driving away the monsters and making her feel safe. She didn't quite understand what had happened that afternoon, but one thing was clear in her childish mind. For the first time in her life, someone had stopped to protect her, and that changed everything. The meeting with Miriam Sanders took place the next morning at Lucy's Diner, a small and discreet place where important conversations could be conducted without much interference. Theodore arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, finding a 38-year-old woman, her brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, and a professional expression that couldn't completely hide a deep emotional fatigue. "Mr. Caldwell," she greeted, extending her hand. "I'm Miriam Sanders. I received your call yesterday, and honestly, I was intrigued by your call." Theodore ordered 2 coffees and got straight to the point. "It's about Lily's situation, Ethel's granddaughter. I witnessed an assault against her yesterday, and I want to understand what the legal options are to protect her." Miriam sighed, stirring sugar into her coffee with slow, thoughtful movements. "Mr. Caldwell, can I ask you a direct question? What exactly is your interest in this child? Are you related to her?" "No," Theodore admitted. "But does that matter? A child is being neglected and abused. I thought that was enough." "It matters because," Miriam paused, choosing her words carefully, "in my 15 years working with child protection, I've learned that when people with no family connection suddenly become interested in specific cases, there are usually complex motivations." The observation hit Theodore like a slap. "Are you questioning my intentions?" "I'm trying to understand them," Miriam corrected, "because if you really want to help Lily, I need to know what kind of help you're offering and why." Theodore was silent for a few minutes, watching the traffic on the street through the cafe's misty window. How could he explain to a stranger about Letitia? How could he talk about the guilt he had carried for 5 years for not being able to protect his own daughter? "I had a daughter," he said finally, his voice lower. "Letitia, she is no longer with us. And when I saw that girl being assaulted yesterday, something inside me broke. I can't save Letitia, but maybe I can help Lily." Miriam studied Theodore's face, noticing the genuine pain in his eyes. "What happened to your daughter?" "That's not relevant now," he replied, clearly uncomfortable. "The important thing is that Lily needs help. And I have the resources to offer it. Resources like financial, educational, medical. I can pay for everything she needs. Private school, health care, even a better house for her and her grandmother if necessary." Miriam shook her head slowly. "Mr. Caldwell, I understand your good intentions, but that's not how it works. We can't just throw money at a problem and expect it to solve itself." "Then how does it work?" "First, we need a formal assessment of the situation." Home visits, interviews with the child and grandmother, medical documentation if there is suspicion of abuse. Then, if we find negligence or abuse, there are specific protocols. And how long does that take? Months, usually. Sometimes years, depending on the complexity of the case. Theodore leaned forward, the frustration evident in his voice. Months? Miriam, this child is suffering now. Every day that passes is another day of... I know, she interrupted. Believe me, I know better than anyone. But the system exists to protect children, not to satisfy the guilty conscience of well-intentioned adults. The sentence came out harsher than Miriam intended, but she didn't retract it. She had seen many cases where the impulsive intervention of third parties had complicated already delicate situations. Can you at least initiate an assessment? Theodore insisted. I can, and I will. But I need you to understand one thing. If we start this process, there's no turning back. Once the child protection system is involved, things can take directions that neither you nor I can control. At that moment, the door of the cafe opened and Frank Peterson entered, looking nervously around until he located Theodore. He was visibly sober, with clean clothes and combed hair, but his red eyes betrayed a sleepless night. Mr. Caldwell, he said, approaching the table hesitantly. Could I talk to you? Miriam stood up immediately. I think I'd better go. Mr. Caldwell, I'll start the procedures we talked about. I'll contact you in a few days. After she left, Frank sat down in the chair she had vacated, clearly uncomfortable. I came to apologize for what happened yesterday. The apologies should be made to Lily, not to me, Theodore replied dryly. You're right. But first, I wanted to talk to you. I wanted to explain that I don't usually be like that. Theodore observed the man in front of him. Frank seemed smaller without the aggression of alcohol, almost fragile. Then explain to me, why did you hit a 4-year-old child? Because I'm lost, Frank admitted, his voice almost a whisper. I lost my job. My wife left, taking my children. For 6 months I've been drinking every day just to be able to sleep. Yesterday, when I saw the girl begging for coins in the square, something in me exploded. That doesn't justify anything. I know, that's why I'm here. Frank took a deep breath. I want to make amends. With her, with Ethel, with myself. But I don't know how. Theodore was silent, studying the man he still considered a monster yesterday. There was something genuine in his regret, a pain that Theodore recognized because he had felt something similar. Are you serious? About wanting to change? Completely serious. Then accept my proposal. Frank frowned. What proposal? Come work for me, at the woodworking shop. Fair salary, fixed hours, but with one condition, no alcohol. Not a drop. And part of your salary will be earmarked for a fund to take care of Lily. The offer left Frank speechless. You're offering me a job after what I did? I'm offering a chance, for you and for her. If you really want to redeem yourself, prove it with actions, not with words. Frank was silent for several minutes, processing the proposal. Why would you do this for me? I don't deserve... Maybe you don't deserve it, Theodore agreed, but everyone deserves a second chance. The question is, are you willing to take advantage of it? Yes, Frank replied without hesitation. Yes, I am. Then I'll see you at the factory tomorrow at 7 in the morning. And Frank, if you show up drunk even once, or if I find out that you touched Lily again, there will be no third chance. After Frank left, visibly moved and grateful, Theodore remained in the cafe for another hour, trying to process everything that had happened. In less than 24 hours, he had become deeply involved in the lives of people he didn't even know, and there was a strange feeling that he was only at the beginning of something much bigger and more complicated than he had imagined. In the afternoon, he decided to visit Ethel and Lily. He found the house locked, but heard voices coming from the backyard. Going around the building, he saw Lily playing alone with some twigs and stones, creating a kind of imaginary house. "Hi, Lily," he greeted gently. The girl raised her big, dark eyes, a shy smile appearing on her face. "Hi, you're the man who helped me yesterday." "I am. How are you feeling?" "Better. Grandma said you're rich and want to take me away." Theodore felt his stomach clench. "And what do you think about that?" Lily thought for a moment, as if she were weighing her words carefully. "I like Grandma, but she's sad a lot, and sometimes there's no food." The simplicity and honesty of the answer touched Theodore deeply. "Lily, if I could make things better for you and your grandma, would you like that?" "How?" "Well, maybe a better house, food always in the refrigerator. You could go to school." Lily's eyes lit up. "Real school, with other boys and girls." Real school. At that moment, Ethel appeared at the back door, her expression hardening when she saw Theodore. "What are you doing here?" "Talking to Lily." "Mrs. Davis, I need you to understand that my offer of help is sincere, and I need you to understand that I've been through this before," she replied. "Important people promising the moon, turning the girl's head, and then disappearing when they discover that raising a child is hard work. I won't disappear. That's what they all say." Ethel approached, placing her hand protectively on Lily's shoulder. "Look, Mr. Caldwell, you seem to be a good person. But Lily is my responsibility. I don't need charity." "You do," said a voice behind them. Everyone turned to see Miriam approaching with a folder of documents in her hand and a worried expression on her face. "Mrs. Davis, I'm Miriam Sanders, a social worker with the city. I need to talk to you about Lily's situation." Ethel's face paled. "What situation? What happened?" "We received a formal report of neglect and abuse. I'm going to need to do a full assessment, starting now." And that's how Theodore realized he had set in motion a machine he could no longer stop. Miriam's assessment lasted 3 hours and was more painful than any of those present had anticipated. With Theodore watching from afar and Ethel alternating between defensive and resigned, the social worker meticulously documented every aspect of Lily's life. The house was smaller than it looked from the outside. The first room served as a living room, kitchen, and recycling storage. Piles of old newspapers, plastic bottles, and aluminum cans occupied almost all the available space, leaving only a small corridor for circulation. The smell was a suffocating mixture of mold, garbage, and moisture. The second room was where Ethel and Lily slept. A double bed occupied most of the space, with a thin, stained mattress that had clearly seen better days. In the corner, a pile of mixed clothes, clean and dirty, impossible to distinguish, served as both of their wardrobes. "Where does Lily eat her meals?" Miriam asked, noting everything on her clipboard. "There at the table," Ethel replied, pointing to a small plastic table with 2 broken chairs. "And what did she eat today?" Ethel hesitated. "Bread with margarine for breakfast. And for lunch. It's not lunchtime yet." Miriam looked at the clock. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. "Mrs. Davis, it's almost 3 o'clock. We eat when we have it," Ethel said, her voice getting harder. "Not every day there's money to buy food." Miriam made more notes. Theodore, watching from afar, felt a mixture of validation and horror. Validation because his suspicions were being confirmed, horror because the reality was worse than he had imagined. "Does Lily go to school?" Miriam continued. "She's too young," Ethel replied quickly. "She's 4 years old. She should have been in preschool for at least a year. I haven't been able to enroll her. It's too much bureaucracy and I work all day." Miriam made more notes. Theodore, observing from afar, felt a mixture of validation and horror. Validation because his suspicions were being confirmed, horror because the reality was worse than he had imagined. "I need to examine Lily," Miriam said, "to check for signs of violence or physical neglect." It was during this examination that the first major discovery happened. In addition to the recent marks from the extension cord, Lily had several small scars scattered across her arms and legs. Some looked like old burns, others were superficial cuts that had healed poorly. How did she get these marks? Miriam asked, carefully photographing each one. Child falls, gets hurt playing, Ethel replied, but her voice didn't sound convincing. These burns aren't from accidents, Miriam observed. They have a very specific shape. It was then that Lily, for the first time since Miriam arrived, spoke spontaneously. Grandma sometimes heats the spoon in the fire when I do something wrong. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethel paled. Theodore felt his stomach churn, and Miriam closed her eyes for a moment as if she were gathering strength to continue. Mrs. Davis, Miriam said, her voice professional but with a harder edge. I'm going to need you to come outside with me to talk in private. Outside, away from Lily, the conversation was direct and brutal. Are you burning this child? Miriam asked bluntly. It's not how you're thinking, Ethel protested. Sometimes she does things she shouldn't, like touching the stove or leaving the house without telling me. A quick little thing with a warm spoon just so she learns. A quick little thing? Mrs. Davis, that's torture. I don't know what else to do, Ethel exploded, all the defensiveness turning into despair. I've been raising her alone since she was born. Her mother died in childbirth. I have no money. I don't get help from anyone. Sometimes she makes me so nervous that you what? Ethel began to cry, a dry, bitter cry of someone who had held back tears for too long. That I can't anymore. I can't take care of her right, but I have nowhere to take her. Theodore approached, unable to just stand by and watch. Mrs. Davis, that's exactly why I'm offering help. Not to take Lily away from you, but to provide conditions so that you can take care of her properly. What if I don't want your help? Ethel asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. It was Miriam who answered. Then I'll have to remove Lily from your custody temporarily. The evidence of abuse is clear and documented. No! Ethel cried. She's all I have. Without her, I have no reason to continue. Then accept the help, Theodore insisted. Let me pay for a better house, regular food, school for Lily. You can continue to be her grandmother, but with support to do it right. Ethel looked between Theodore and Miriam, clearly divided between pride and despair. And if you decide it's not enough? What if you decide to take her away from me anyway? Miriam sighed. Mrs. Davis, my job is not to separate families. It's to protect children. If you accept help and demonstrate real improvements in the care of Lily, there is no reason for removal. I need time to think. Time is exactly what we don't have, Miriam said. I need a decision today. Either you accept a monitoring plan with support from Mr. Caldwell, or Lily goes to a foster home while we evaluate other options. At that moment, Lily appeared in the doorway, looking at the three adults with a confused expression. Grandma, are you crying? Ethel knelt down and hugged her granddaughter tightly. I am, honey, but it's going to be okay. Is the nice man going to take care of us? Lily asked, looking at Theodore. The child's simple and direct question cut through all the adults' complexities. Theodore knelt beside Ethel. I'm going to take care of both of you, he promised. If your grandmother lets me. Ethel looked at her granddaughter's benefactor, seeing in those big, trusting eyes something she had forgotten existed. Hope. Okay, she whispered. I accept your help. Miriam immediately began to draw up a monitoring plan. Weekly visits, specific goals for improvement in living conditions, and a clear schedule of necessary changes. First, we need to resolve the housing issue, she said. This house doesn't offer adequate conditions. I can rent a better house for them, Theodore offered, and the food needs to be regularized, 3 meals a day at least. I can pay Ethel a monthly allowance, enough so that she doesn't have to work collecting trash and can dedicate herself to taking care of Lily. And the education. Private school, the best in the area. Miriam made notes of everything. Very good. I'll give you 2 weeks to change housing and food, and 1 month to enroll in school. It was then that Ethel asked a question that no one had thought of. And when you get tired of paying for all this, what happens to us? The question caught Theodore off guard. He had thought about the immediate rescue, but not about the long-term commitment he was making. "I won't get tired," he said. But even as he spoke, he realized that he couldn't guarantee that. And if something happens to you, if you get sick, if you lose your money. Theodore was silent, realizing for the first time the magnitude of what he was proposing to do. It wasn't just a one-time help. He was taking responsibility for the future of two people. "Let's solve one thing at a time," Miriam said, noticing the growing tension. "For now, the important thing is to get Lily out of the immediate situation of risk." But as she spoke, she also wondered if Theodore really understood what he was getting into. In her 15 years of experience, she had seen many well-intentioned people start rescue projects only to give up when they realized that caring for human lives was more complicated than they imagined. When everyone finally said goodbye that afternoon, each carried a different weight. Ethel felt a mixture of relief and terror at the uncertain future. Miriam carried the responsibility of monitoring a situation that could explode at any moment. And Theodore was beginning to understand that he had committed himself to something much bigger than simply helping a child. What none of them knew is that the decision made that day would trigger a series of events that would test not only their good intentions, but also the limits of their courage, resilience, and capacity for sacrifice. The first 15 days after the agreement were an emotional roller coaster for everyone involved. Theodore had found a simple but decent house to rent on Rose Lane, on the other side of town, away from the area where Ethel collected recyclables. It had 2 bedrooms, a living room with an integrated kitchen, and a small yard where Lily could play safely. The move happened on a Saturday morning. Theodore arrived with a small truck, expecting to help carry Ethel and Lily's belongings. What he found shocked him. Everything they owned fit into 3 torn plastic bags. "Is that all?" he asked, trying not to show his surprise. "What were we going to keep?" Ethel replied with a tone that mixed wounded dignity and pragmatism. When you live from one meal to the next, there's no room to accumulate things." Lily was excited about the move, running from one side of the new house to the other, exploring each room as if it were a palace. Her room, the first room of her own in her entire life, left her especially enchanted. "Is it just mine?" she asked repeatedly. "No one else is going to sleep here?" "Just yours," Theodore confirmed, feeling a satisfaction he hadn't experienced in years. But the initial euphoria soon gave way to unexpected complications. Ethel, after a lifetime of struggle and self-sufficiency, didn't know how to deal with the new reality. The monthly allowance that Theodore had established was more money than she had seen together in decades, but instead of relief, it made her deeply uncomfortable. "It's not right," she murmured, counting the bills for the 3rd time. "No one gives money like this without expecting anything in return." "We've already talked about this, Mrs. Davis. I don't expect anything other than to see Lily well cared for." "But what if you decide you want something? When you decide you have rights over her?" Ethel's suspicions were not unfounded. In her decades living in poverty, she had learned that generosity always came with invisible strings attached. And Theodore, as well-intentioned as he was a wealthy man accustomed to having control over his decisions and investments. The first major conflict arose in the 2nd week. Miriam had scheduled a medical appointment for Lily, a complete checkup to assess her health and development. Theodore offered to take the 2, but Ethel refused. "I can take my granddaughter to the doctor alone." "Of course you can," Theodore agreed. "But I thought it would be easier if I went along to resolve any payment issues, or I don't need you to treat me like I'm incapable." Ethel cut, her voice gaining a hardness that Theodore hadn't seen before. The appointment revealed what everyone feared. Lily was significantly underweight for her age, had severe anemia and clear signs of chronic malnutrition. In addition, her motor development was delayed, probably due to lack of stimulation and adequate care. "Intensive nutritional monitoring will be necessary," explained the pediatrician, Dr. Carmen Oliveira. And I also recommend a psychological evaluation to treat possible traumas related to the abuse. When Ethel arrived home with the results and the list of recommended specialists, she found Theodore waiting in the living room. Upon hearing the diagnosis, he immediately picked up the phone. "I'm going to call the best specialists in New York City. Lily needs the best treatment available." "No," Ethel said firmly. "What do you mean, no? Mrs. Davis, your granddaughter needs specialized care." "She does, yes, but not from expensive doctors in New York City. The clinic here has good professionals. It's just a matter of scheduling calmly." Theodore felt the frustration growing in his chest. But why settle for the basic when we can offer the best? Because the basic is what people like us deserve. And because I don't want to create expectations in the girl that she won't be able to maintain her whole life. It was at this moment that Theodore realized that he was dealing with something much more complex than he had imagined. It wasn't just a matter of financial resources, but of completely different worldviews. The situation became even more complicated when Frank appeared at the new house on a Thursday afternoon. He was sober, as promised, and had dedicated himself to work in the woodworking shop with a determination that impressed even the oldest employees. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, taking off his cap with respect, "I came to see how the girl is adapting." Ethel, who was preparing dinner, turned around with a hostile expression. "What are you doing here? I want to apologize to Lily. Personally. I don't want you near my granddaughter." "Mrs. Davis," Theodore intervened, "Frank is changing. He deserves a chance to redeem himself." "Deserves? He hit my granddaughter with an extension cord. He left marks that haven't completely healed yet." Frank lowered his head, clearly ashamed. "You have every right to hate me, but please, let me talk to her. I need her to know that I regret it." Lily, who was playing in the yard, had heard the raised voices and appeared at the kitchen door. When she saw Frank, she instinctively hid behind her grandmother. "Hi, Lily," Frank said softly, remaining at a respectful distance. "Do you remember me?" The girl nodded, but didn't come out from behind Ethel. "I came here to apologize to you. What I did to you was very ugly, very wrong, and I want you to know that I will never do such a thing again." "Why did you hit me?" Lily asked, her voice small but clear. The child's direct question completely disarmed Frank. He knelt down, getting at her level, and Theodore could see tears forming in his eyes. "Because I was very sad and very lost. But that was no excuse to hurt you. You didn't do anything wrong. It was all my fault." Lily studied Frank's face for a few moments, with that childish ability to perceive sincerity. "You won't hit me again?" "Never again. I promise." "Okay," she said simply, and then returned to the yard, as if the matter were resolved. The adults were silent for a few minutes, processing the ease with which the child had forgiven something they considered unforgivable. "Children are better than us," Frank murmured. But Frank's visit had opened a new source of tension. Ethel was furious with Theodore for allowing the man who had assaulted her granddaughter to appear at her house. "You had no right to let him in here," she said after Frank left. "Mrs. Davis, everyone deserves a second chance. And who are you to decide that? Who are you to decide what is best for my granddaughter? I'm someone who is trying to help." "You're trying to control," Ethel exploded. "You want to decide where we live, which doctor we consult, who we talk to. This isn't help, it's possession." Ethel's words hit Theodore like a slap in the face. Could it be true? Was he really trying to help, or just satisfy his own need for control and redemption? That night, alone at home, Theodore called Miriam. "I think I made a mistake," he said. "What kind of mistake?" "Ethel is right. I'm trying to control the situation instead of just supporting it." Miriam sighed. "Theodore, can I ask you a personal question? What really happened to your daughter?" The silence stretched for so long that Miriam thought he had hung up. Finally, Theodore spoke, his voice filled with a pain he had kept for years. "Letitia killed herself at 16. She was being psychologically abused by her boyfriend, and I I didn't realize it. I didn't protect her when I should have protected her. And now you're trying to save Lily to forgive yourself. Maybe, he admitted. But does that make my help less valid? No, Miriam replied, but it makes it more dangerous. Because when we act from guilt and not genuine love, we run the risk of causing more harm than good. After the call, Theodore stayed awake until late, looking at the ceiling and wondering if he was really helping Lily or just using her to heal his own wounds. On the other side of town, in the new house on Rose Lane, Ethel was also awake, watching Lily sleep peacefully in her new bed. For the first time in years, the girl was well-fed, clean and safe, but at a cost that Ethel had not yet been able to fully calculate. And somewhere between these two lonely vigils, Lily's future hung in a delicate balance, where good intentions and complex motivations mixed in ways that none of the adults could predict or control. The discovery that would change everything happened on a Monday morning, when Theodore went to the doctor's office to pick up Lily's test results. Dr. Carmen Oliveira received him with a worried expression that immediately put him on alert. "Mr. Caldwell, I need to talk to you about some findings in the exams," she said, indicating a chair in front of her desk. "Anything serious?" "Not exactly serious, but unexpected." The doctor opened Lily's chart and pointed to some results. The blood tests revealed a condition that we don't usually see in cases of family neglect. Theodore frowned. "What kind of condition?" "Lily has a very rare blood type, AB negative, which occurs in less than 1% of the population. In addition, she has a genetic condition called G6PD deficiency, which can cause anemia in certain circumstances." "And what does that mean?" Dr. Carmen hesitated before continuing. "It means we need the medical histories of her biological parents to better understand the proper treatment. Mr. Caldwell, what did Ethel tell you about Lily's parents?" "That her mother died in childbirth. About the father, she never talked much." "Well, I'm going to need that information. And there's something else." The doctor leaned forward. "Isadora's physical characteristics, combined with this rare genetic condition, suggest a specific ethnic background. It's not common in the local population." Theodore felt a chill in his stomach. "Are you implying that—" "I'm suggesting that maybe Ethel hasn't told the whole truth about Isadora's origins." That afternoon, Theodore confronted Ethel with the medical findings. The woman was hanging clothes in the backyard when he arrived, and the tension was immediate when she saw his serious expression. "Ethel, we need to talk about Isadora's parents. I've said everything I had to say. Joanna died in childbirth. And the father?" Ethel looked visibly uncomfortable. "I never really knew him. Joanna didn't talk much about him." "The medical tests revealed some things that don't make sense with this story," Theodore insisted. "Isadora has genetic characteristics that suggest an origin you never mentioned." Ethel stopped hanging clothes and turned to him, her eyes showing a mixture of fear and defiance. "And what do you want me to do about it?" "I want the truth." "The truth?" Ethel laughed bitterly. "The truth is that sometimes it's better to lie to protect a child." It was then that the first big revelation exploded. "Joanna wasn't my daughter," Ethel confessed, sitting heavily on a plastic chair. "She was a girl who showed up here pregnant, with nowhere to go. She had mental problems, couldn't take care of herself properly." Theodore felt the ground open beneath his feet. "What do you mean, mental problems?" "Intellectual disability. Mild, but noticeable. She was 5 months pregnant when she came here, asking for shelter, said her family had kicked her out when they found out about the pregnancy." "And you took her in?" "I took her in. I took care of her during the last months of pregnancy. And when Isadora was born—" Ethel paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Joanna had complications in childbirth, died 3 days later. And you kept the child. What was I going to do? Throw her on the street? Turn her over to the state? I knew how those kids are treated in the system." Theodore processed the information in silence. But why did you lie? Why did you say Joanna was your daughter? Because that way I could receive government assistance. Benefit for grandparents who raise orphaned grandchildren. It was the only money coming in here. The confession had devastating implications. Ethel had been receiving Social Security benefits under false pretenses for 4 years. And more importantly, Isadora had no real relatives. Who else knows about this? Theodore asked. No one. The midwife who helped with the delivery died 2 years ago. The birth certificate lists Joanna as the mother and an unknown father. Ethel, do you understand the gravity of what you're telling me? This is fraud against the government. I understand, she said, raising her chin with dignity. And I also understand that now you have a perfect excuse to take Isadora away from me and keep her all to yourself. The accusation hit Theodore like a punch. That's not what, isn't it? Then why do you seem so pleased with what you've discovered? Theodore paused to examine himself. There was, he admitted to himself, a part of him that felt relieved. If Ethel had no legal rights over Isadora, it would be much easier for him to assume her guardianship officially. I'm going to have to report this to Miriam, he said finally. I know, I expected it. That night, the call to Miriam was one of the hardest Theodore had ever made. The social worker listened in silence, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification. Theodore, this changes everything, she said when he finished. If Ethel has no real family ties with Isadora, and on top of that committed document fraud, we're going to have to completely review the situation. What does that mean in practice? It means that Isadora will have to be placed temporarily in a foster home while we investigate the whole situation, and Ethel will probably have to face criminal charges for the improperly received benefit. No, Theodore said immediately. We can't separate them. Regardless of there being no blood ties, Ethel has raised Isadora since birth. She's the only family the girl knows. Theodore, that's not how it works. We have protocols. Screw the protocols. This child has already suffered enough. And you think the solution is to keep her with someone who committed fraud and lied to everyone for 4 years? Theodore was silent, realizing that he didn't have a good answer to that question. Look, Miriam continued, softening her tone, I understand your concern, but now that we know the truth, we have to act according to the law. I'll have to make an official visit tomorrow and communicate the new findings. After the call, Theodore spent the whole night awake, trying to find a solution that would protect both Isadora and Ethel. It was during those sleepless hours that he made a decision that would change his life forever. The next morning, before Miriam's official visit, he went to the house on Rose Lane to find Ethel. The woman was sitting on the porch, watching Isadora play in the yard, with an expression of someone who knew that those might be their last moments together. Ethel, I have a proposal. You don't need to pretend anymore, Theodore. I already understand that you got what you wanted. I want to adopt Isadora officially, he said, ignoring her hostility. But I want you to be part of her life, as a grandmother, even if you're not biological. Ethel looked at him in surprise. What are you saying? I'm saying that we can form an unconventional family, but a family nonetheless. I assume legal guardianship of Isadora, guarantee all the resources she needs, but you continue to be her grandmother. Living with us, helping to raise her. Why would you do that? Because, Theodore paused, choosing his words carefully, I realize that I don't just want to save Isadora. I want her to be happy, and she won't be happy without you. It was a risky and unconventional proposal, but it was also the only solution Theodore could see that would protect both the child and the woman who had raised her with love, even in impossible conditions. Ethel was silent for a long time, watching Isadora. And if I don't accept, then Miriam will have to follow the protocols. Isadora goes to a foster home, you face charges for fraud, and I'll fight for her custody through legal channels. That sounds like blackmail. It's not blackmail, it's the reality of the situation that has been created. At that moment, Isadora ran to them, sweaty and smiling. "Grandma, did you see? I managed to jump rope 5 times in a row." Ethel hugged the girl, closing her eyes, as if she wanted to keep that moment forever. When she opened them, she looked directly at Theodore. "If I accept your proposal, how can I be sure that you won't push me away from her when you get tired of me? Because I'll formalize it legally. You'll have guaranteed rights as an official caregiver." It was an imperfect solution to an imperfect situation. But perhaps it was the only chance to keep Isadora in an environment where she would be loved, regardless of the legal and emotional complexities involved. "All right," Ethel said finally. "I accept." Neither of them knew that this decision would lead them to face challenges much greater than anything they had imagined until then. The formalization of the new family situation proved to be much more complicated than Theodore had anticipated. When Miriam arrived for the official visit, accompanied by Aparecida Gomez, the 41-year-old prosecuting attorney responsible for child protection cases in the district, the atmosphere immediately became tense. Aparecida was a tall, thin woman with black hair always tied in an impeccable bun, and a posture that made it clear that she would not tolerate games or half-truths. Her 15 years of career had made her known for her direct approach and for always prioritizing the interests of children above any social or political consideration. "Mr. Caldwell," she greeted coldly, "I've heard interesting things about your philanthropic initiative." The tone made it clear that interesting was not necessarily positive. Theodore immediately felt that he was being evaluated in a way that went far beyond his stated intentions. "Dr. Gomes, my intention is only to ensure Isadora's well-being. I understand, and your proposal for joint adoption with the woman who committed document fraud for 4 years is part of that well-being?" Ethel, who was sitting in the room holding Isadora, turned visibly pale. "Doctor, I never wanted to do anything wrong. I was just trying to take care of the girl." "Mrs. Davis," Aparecida said, her voice softening slightly, "I understand your motivations. But the fact is that you received benefits under false pretenses and lied about your relationship with the child for years." "And now?" Theodore asked. "What's the next step?" Aparecida opened her briefcase and took out several documents. "The next step is a complete investigation about your financial situation, Mrs. Davis, about your real motivations for this adoption, and especially about what is really best for Isadora." "What do you mean by investigation about my motivations?" "Mr. Caldwell, in my experience, rich and single men don't usually suddenly become interested in poor children without specific reasons." The insinuation hit Theodore like a slap in the face. "Are you questioning my integrity?" "I'm questioning everything. It's my job." Miriam intervened, trying to ease the tension. "Dr. Gomez, I've been following the case from the beginning. Mr. Caldwell's intentions seem genuine." "Seem," Aparecida repeated, "but appearances can be deceiving, especially when there's so much money and power involved." It was at that moment that Isadora, who had been quiet in Ethel's lap, spoke for the first time. "Why is the lady being mean to Uncle Theodore?" The silence that followed was embarrassing. Aparecida looked at the girl, her expression softening slightly. "I'm not being mean, honey. I just want to make sure you're going to be with people who really take good care of you." "Uncle Theodore takes good care? He gave me a new house and food all the time." The simplicity of Isadora's defense touched everyone present, but Aparecida maintained her professional posture. "Isadora, would you like to continue living with your grandmother and Uncle Theodore?" "I want to, but only if no one leaves." The child's answer revealed an anxiety of abandonment that cut the heart of all the adults present. Aparecida took careful notes before continuing. Very well, I will authorize a 3-month evaluation period. During this time, Isadora remains under temporary shared custody, but with intensive supervision. Weekly visits, monthly reports, and psychological evaluations for everyone involved. Psychological evaluations? Theodore repeated. To understand your real motivations, Mr. Caldwell, and to assess whether Mrs. Davis is fit to be responsible for a child, considering her history of questionable decisions. After the authorities left, the house was filled with tense silence. Isadora had gone to play in the yard, unaware of the seriousness of the discussions that would define her future. They think I'm some kind of predator, Theodore muttered, running his hands through his hair. And they think I'm a criminal, Ethel added bitterly. It was then that Theodore made a decision that would reveal much about his character. Ethel, I'm going to pay for a lawyer for you too, to defend you from the fraud charges. Ethel looked at him in surprise. Why? If I go to jail, it's easier for you to adopt Isadora. Because I don't want her to lose you. And because you don't deserve to be punished for trying to protect an orphaned child. It was a decision that showed that, despite all the complexities of his motivations, Theodore was genuinely concerned about the well-being of everyone involved, not just his own desires. In the following weeks, the psychological evaluations revealed painful truths that none of them were prepared to face. The psychologist, Dr. Marcelo Ribeiro, a 50-year-old man with an impeccable reputation, conducted individual sessions with each adult. With Theodore, the sessions were particularly revealing. Tell me about your daughter, Dr. Ribeiro asked during the third session. I'd rather not talk about it. Mr. Caldwell, how can I assess your motivations for adopting Isadora if I don't understand what led you to this decision? It was then that Theodore, for the first time in 5 years, told the whole story. Letitia, the abusive boyfriend, the signs he had ignored, and the terrible day he found his daughter in her room, a goodbye letter beside her. She wrote that she felt invisible, Theodore said, the tears finally coming, that no one protected her from the monsters. And I was so focused on work, so convinced that giving money and comfort was enough, that I didn't see that she was screaming for help. And now you see Isadora as a second chance. I see Isadora as a child who deserves protection. If that also gives me a chance for redemption, I won't lie and say that it doesn't matter. With Ethel, the sessions revealed an equally painful story. She had lost a child as a baby, 20 years ago, and had never been able to have other children. When Joanna appeared pregnant and helpless, it was as if fate was giving her a second chance to be a mother. I knew it was wrong to receive the benefit, she admitted, but it was the only way to have money to take care of her properly, and I was so afraid that they would take her away from me. Why didn't you seek legal channels for adoption? Because I knew the system. Old woman, poor, uneducated. They would never give me a child to raise. The evaluations also included observations of Isadora in her family environment, and it was during one of those observations that something happened that would change the whole dynamics of the situation. Frank Peterson showed up for a visit on a Saturday afternoon. He had been sober for 2 months, working conscientiously at Caldwell Woodworking, and had become a regular presence in the life of the improvised family. Isadora had completely lost her fear of him, and even Ethel had begun to accept his presence. Dr. Marcello watched silently as Frank Peterson played with Isadora in the yard, teaching her how to make paper airplanes. There was a naturalness in their interaction that contrasted with the tension that always permeated the relationships between the other adults. Frank is good with her, Ethel commented, watching from the window. He is, Theodore agreed. Who would have thought that the man who assaulted her would become what? Asked Dr. Ribeiro. A father figure to her, Theodore completed, realizing the truth of his own words. It was at that moment that Dr. Ribeiro made an observation that disturbed everyone present. It's interesting that Isadora seems more relaxed and natural with Frank than with any of you. The comment created an uncomfortable silence. It was true, and everyone knew it. With Frank, Isadora laughed genuinely, asked curious questions, behaved like a normal child. With Theodore and Ethel, there was always an underlying tension, a feeling that everyone was playing a role. "What does that mean?" Theodore asked. "It means that maybe you're all trying so hard to do the right thing that you've forgotten to simply be authentic with her." It was a disturbing revelation that would force everyone to re-examine not only their motivations, but also their methods. And it would plant the seed of an idea that none of them were prepared to consider. Maybe the best solution for Isadora wasn't any of the options they had considered until then. The first major crisis came at the end of the second month of evaluation, when Theodore began to exhibit symptoms that he could no longer ignore. The intense abdominal pains that woke him up in the middle of the night, the sudden weight loss, and the constant fatigue forced him to seek medical help. Dr. Roberto Almeida, his doctor for more than 10 years, couldn't hide his concern when he received the test results. "Theodore, I need to be direct with you. The tests show a mass on the pancreas. It needs further investigation, but you suspect cancer." "Unfortunately, yes, and if it's confirmed, we'll need to act quickly." Theodore left the office in shock. During the following week, while awaiting more specific tests, he tried to maintain normalcy, but Ethel, with her life experience, realized that something was wrong. "You're sick," she stated one morning when she found him sitting in the kitchen at 5 in the morning, clearly having not slept. "I'm fine. Don't lie to me. I've taken care of sick people before. I recognize the signs." Theodore looked at her for a long moment. "And if I am sick?" "What does that change?" "It changes that you're making promises to Isadora that you might not be able to keep." Ethel's direct answer hit him like a punch. She was right, and they both knew it. When the results confirmed advanced stage pancreatic cancer with a prognosis of 6 to 8 months of life, Theodore entered a spiral of panic that had nothing to do with his own mortality, but rather with Isadora's future. "Doctor Almeida, how long exactly?" "With aggressive treatment, maybe a year. Without treatment, 6 months at most." "And if I start treatment now?" "Theodore, I'll be honest. Even with chemotherapy, your chances are minimal, and the treatment will leave you very debilitated." That night, Theodore called Miriam Sanders with news that completely changed the situation. "I need to speed up the adoption process," he said without preamble. "Why? Did something happen?" "I'm sick, seriously sick. I have a few months to live." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Theodore thought the call had dropped. "Miriam?" "I'm here. Theodore, this changes everything. If you don't have a long life expectancy, you can't adopt a child. I can establish a trust fund, ensure that she has resources for education and health care for the rest of her life. But who's going to raise her? Ethel, a 67-year-old woman who committed fraud and has no financial means? We'll find a solution. Theodore, be realistic. A 4-year-old child needs more than just money. She needs stability, a family that can accompany her growth." But Theodore had already made a desperate decision. If he couldn't guarantee Isadora's future through legal adoption, he would find another way. The next morning, he sought out Frank at Caldwell Woodworking. The man was working on a hardwood table, completely focused on his craft. In the 2 months of sobriety, he had become an exemplary employee and recovered much of his self-esteem. "Frank, I need to talk to you about something serious." "Sure, boss. Any problem with my work?" "No, none of that. It's about Isadora." Theodore took a deep breath. "I'm sick, cancer. I have a few months to live." Frank stopped working and turned around, his face showing shock and genuine compassion. "My God, boss, I'm so sorry. I want you to consider adopting Isadora." The proposal left Frank speechless. Me? But I can't. I have a criminal record, a history of alcoholism. I hit the girl herself. You've changed. I've seen the change. And more importantly, Isadora sees it. She trusts you. But I can't afford to raise a child. I can barely take care of myself. I'm going to leave resources. Enough money to pay for everything she needs. You would just need to be the father she deserves. Frank sat heavily in a chair, processing the impossible proposal. Why me? Why not Ethel officially? Because Ethel is 67 years old. When Isadora is a teenager, she'll be over 80. And because of the fraud, it will be difficult to get legal approval for her. And you think it will be easy to get approval for me? Theodore hesitated. It won't be easy. But you're employed, sober for 2 months, and have demonstrated real change. With proper legal help? Theodore, Frank interrupted, can I ask an honest question? Why are you doing this? Why is it so important for you to save this girl? It was then that Theodore told Frank about Letitia, about the guilt he carried for not having protected his own daughter, about how seeing Isadora being assaulted had awakened in him an obsessive need for redemption. I understand, Frank said when he finished. You want to save her to save yourself. Maybe. But does that make my desire less valid? I don't know. But I can tell you one thing. I also want to save her to save myself. Every day I spend sober, every time she smiles at me instead of running away in fear, I feel less of a monster and more human. It was a brutal admission of honesty that created a bond between the two men that went beyond employer and employee. So you'll consider it? I'll consider it. But there are conditions. Which ones? First, Ethel has to agree and remain part of Isadora's life. Second, you're going to help me understand how to be a father, because I have no idea what I'm doing. And third, if I do something wrong, if I start drinking again, or if I can't be the father she deserves, you promise me you'll have an alternative plan. It was a surreal conversation between two broken men trying to find a way to protect an innocent child. And although neither of them knew if they would really succeed, both were willing to try. When Theodore told Ethel about his illness and the proposal for Frank, her reaction was explosive. "You've completely lost it," she shouted. "You want to hand my granddaughter over to the man who almost killed her." "Ethel, Frank has changed." "Changed? It's been 2 months, 2 months of sobriety. And you want to bet Isadora's future on that? And what's the alternative? When I die, you won't be able to stay with her legally. She'll go into the system, to a family of strangers who might not treat her well. At least they would be strangers with no history of violence against her." The discussion stretched for hours, with Isadora sleeping in the next room, unaware that her future was being decided between screams and tears in the living room. "Ethel," Theodore said finally, exhausted, "I'm going to die. That's a fact. The question is, are we going to use the time I have left to find the best possible solution for Isadora, or are we going to waste it arguing about imperfect solutions?" "The best solution would be you not dying," she replied, and for the first time since they met, Theodore saw genuine tears in her eyes. "I know, but I can't change that. I can only try to ensure that Isadora stays with people who love her." "And you really believe that Frank loves her?" Theodore thought about the question carefully. "I believe he's learning to love her. And sometimes the love that is earned is stronger than the love that one is born with." It was a risky philosophy on which to bet a child's future, but with time running out and options dwindling, perhaps it was the only hope that remained. That night, while Isadora slept peacefully, unaware of the storm brewing around her, 3 adults stayed up late, each carrying the weight of impossible decisions that would determine the fate of a 4-year-old girl who only wanted to be loved and protected. And somewhere between despair and hope, they began to form a plan that would challenge all social and legal conventions. But that might be Isadora's only chance to have a real family before it was too late. The second great revelation came through an unexpected call on a Wednesday morning. Theodore was at the hospital undergoing his second chemotherapy session when Miriam Sanders approached him with an expression that mixed urgency and concern. "Theodore, I need to talk to you about something I discovered investigating Ethel's past." "What did you discover?" Miriam sat down next to the armchair where he was receiving intravenous medication. "Remember you mentioned that Ethel said she had been deceived by wealthy people before?" "I remember. I found records of a case that happened 15 years ago. Ethel had a relationship with a man named Vincent Maurice, a businessman from Sao Paulo who had a summer house here." Theodore frowned. "So? He promised marriage, said he was going to take her out of poverty, make her happy. For 2 years he supported her financially, until one day he simply disappeared. It was later discovered that he was married and had a family in Sao Paulo. That explains a lot about her distrust of me. But that's not all, Theodore. Vincent left Ethel pregnant." The revelation hit Theodore like a lightning bolt. She had a child, a daughter, who died at 6 months of pneumonia because Ethel didn't have money for proper medical treatment. Theodore closed his eyes, feeling the weight of this information. That's why she became so attached to Isadora. That's why she made a point of protecting Isadora in any way, even if illegally. In her mind, you're just like Vincent, a rich man making promises that he may not keep. But I'm not Vincent. Are you sure about that? Because in a few months you're going to be dead, and Isadora is going to be exactly like Ethel's daughter was, orphaned and abandoned. Miriam's words were cruel, but necessary. Theodore was so focused on his own redemption that he hadn't fully considered the trauma that his death would cause to everyone involved. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe you should gradually step away. Let Isadora get used to the idea that you won't always be present." "I can't do that. I don't have enough time to resolve her situation." "Then maybe you should stop trying to be the savior and start thinking about what's really best for her in the long term." That afternoon, when he returned home still weak from chemotherapy, Theodore found a scene that made him question everything he had planned. Frank was in the yard with Isadora, teaching her how to plant sunflower seeds in a small garden they had started together. "Uncle Frank, when will the sunflowers grow?" asked Isadora, her little hands carefully placing the seeds in the ground. "It'll take about 3 months for them to get really big," Frank replied patiently. "But we're going to take care of them every day, water them, pull the weeds. What if I forget to water them? Then I'll remind you, and if I forget, you remind me. We'll take care of them together, okay?" The naturalness of the conversation, the way Isadora completely trusted Frank, the infinite patience he demonstrated, all this contrasted drastically with the tense interactions she had with Theodore. Ethel, watching from the kitchen window, approached him. "You see how he is with her?" "I see. It's different from how you are." "How so?" "You treat her like she's a porcelain doll that could break at any moment. He treats her like a child." It was a painful but true observation. Theodore had been so concerned with protecting Isadora that he had forgotten to simply be present with her. "Ethel, Miriam told me about Vincent." Ethel's face hardened immediately. "And what did she tell you?" "About the promises he made. About your daughter." Ethel was silent for a long time, watching Frank and Isadora in the yard. "Ana Luisa," she said finally. "What?" "My daughter's name was Ana Luisa. She had big, dark eyes, just like Isadora. I'm sorry. Vincent said he would take care of us forever, that he would give me a better life. In the end, when Ana Luisa got sick, he said he couldn't get involved because his wife would get suspicious." Theodore felt his stomach churn. "Ethel, I'm not Vincent." "Aren't you?" "Because in a few months you're going to be dead, and Isadora will be without the man who promised to take care of her forever." The accusation was unfair and fair at the same time. Theodore hadn't chosen to get sick, but he had made promises knowing that he might not be able to keep them. "That's why I'm trying to get everything organized before I die." Organizing how? Leaving her with Frank. A man she's known for 3 months. A man she loves and trusts. What if he starts drinking again? What if he can't handle the responsibility? What if he decides that raising a child is too much work? These were questions for which Theodore had no satisfactory answers. But at that moment, Isadora ran to them, all covered in dirt and radiant with joy. "Uncle Theodore, I planted sunflowers. Uncle Frank said that when they grow, they'll be as tall as you." Theodore knelt down to get on her level, ignoring the pain the movement caused. "That's wonderful. And you're going to take care of them?" "I am, every day. And when you... Isadora stopped in the middle of the sentence, as if a shadow had passed through her eyes. It was as if, in her childlike intuition, she realized that something was wrong, even without understanding what. "When I what, my dear? When you go traveling again, I'm going to keep taking care of the sunflowers until you come back." The innocence of the answer broke Theodore's heart. Isadora didn't understand that there were trips from which one doesn't return. That night, after Isadora fell asleep, the 3 adults gathered in the living room for a conversation that none of them wanted to have. "We need to talk about what's going to happen when Theodore dies," Ethel said directly. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Ethel, no, Frank, we can't pretend this isn't going to happen anymore, and Isadora needs to be prepared." "How do you prepare a 4-year-old child to lose someone they love?" Theodore asked. "By telling the truth," Ethel replied, "little by little, carefully, but telling the truth." It was then that Frank made a confession that surprised everyone. "I don't know if I'll be able to do it." "Do what?" "Be her father alone. Every time I look at Isadora, I still see the cord in my hand. I see her on the floor crying. How can I raise a child that I've already hurt?" "You've changed," Theodore insisted. "Changed? Or am I just pretending I've changed because it's easier than accepting what I really am?" It was a question that none of them could answer for sure. Was redemption possible? Could a man who had committed violence against a child become a protective father? And more importantly, did they have the right to bet Isadora's future on that possibility? "Frank," Ethel said slowly, "can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "What do you feel when you look at Isadora now?" Frank thought carefully before answering. "I feel responsibility and guilt, but I also feel affection, like she's really mine. And when she calls you Uncle Frank, I feel like maybe I can be better than I've always been." Ethel nodded slowly. "Then maybe you really can do it. Because being a father isn't about not making mistakes. It's about learning from them and doing better next time." It was a philosophy of parenthood born from the painful experience of someone who had lost a daughter and now had a second chance. And maybe it was the only hope that remained for a situation that seemed to have no perfect solution. "There's one thing we need to decide," Theodore said. "How are we going to tell Isadora about my illness?" "Together," Ethel replied. "The 3 of us together, so that she knows that even when you leave, she won't be alone." It was an imperfect plan for an impossible situation. But it was all they had, and they would have to trust that love, however complicated and imperfect it was, would be enough to protect a girl who had already suffered more than any child should suffer. The third major twist came through a discovery that no one had anticipated. Cybele Martins, Miriam Sanders' supervisor at the Social Services Department, had been observing Isadora's case with growing interest, but not for the reasons everyone imagined. During a routine meeting about ongoing cases, Cybele asked specific questions about Theodore's financial situation and the resources he had allocated for Isadora. "Miriam, what exactly is the value of the fund that Mr. Caldwell has established for the child? Why is that relevant to our evaluation, Cybele?" "Because we need to ensure that the resources are properly managed. A child with this type of inheritance needs specialized supervision." Miriam felt a chill down her spine. She had known Cybele for 5 years, and had never seen her show so much interest in the financial aspects of a case. Specialized supervision. Yes, I know an institution in adaptar como uma cidade americana relevante that has expertise in caring for orphaned children with significant assets. Maybe we should consider that option. Cibele. Isadora isn't an orphan. She has a grandmother who raised her since she was a baby and is now being cared for by a functional family. A functional family. A woman who committed fraud, a terminally ill man, and an ex-abuser. Is that your definition of a functional family? The conversation left Miriam deeply uncomfortable. That night, she decided to do some investigating on her own about the institution that Cibele had mentioned. What she discovered made her nauseous. The Adaptar o Nome da Instituição para Algo Apropriado para Usar wasn't a charitable institution, but a private company that managed the assets of orphaned minors, charging administrative fees that reached 30% of the total value. And even more disturbing, Cibele's sister, Adaptar o Nome, worked there as an administrative director. The next morning, Miriam confronted her supervisor directly. Cibele, I need to understand your interest in the Isadora case. My interest is purely professional. Really? Because I discovered that your sister works at the Adaptar o Nome da Instituição para Algo Apropriado para Usar. Cibele's face hardened. So what? That doesn't mean anything. It means that you have a personal financial interest in transferring Isadora there. Be careful with your accusations, Miriam. I can interpret that as insubordination, and I can interpret your conduct as corruption. The tension between the two women reached a breaking point when Cibele made a threat that revealed her true intentions. Miriam, you have a family to support, a salary to maintain. It would be a shame if issues of insubordination affected your professional stability. It was at that moment that Miriam realized that she was facing something much larger and more dangerous than she had imagined. Cibele wasn't just trying to benefit financially from Isadora's situation, she was willing to threaten anyone who opposed her plans. That afternoon, Miriam sought out Theodore at home, finding him visibly weakened after another chemotherapy session. Ethel was in the kitchen preparing a broth, trying to get him to eat something, while Isadora played quietly in the living room, already intuitively realizing that Uncle Theodore wasn't well. Theodore, we have a serious problem, Miriam said, sitting down next to him on the couch. What kind of problem? Miriam told him about her discovery regarding Cibele and the Adaptar o Nome da Instituição para Algo Apropriado para Usar. As she spoke, Theodore's face grew paler and paler. Are you saying that my supervisor wants to send Isadora to an institution just to steal the money I left her? Exactly. And she's using my position to push for this transfer. Ethel, who had heard everything from the kitchen, joined them with an expression that wasn't at all surprised. I warned you this would happen. How so? Theodore asked. Rich people only attract interest. There's always someone wanting to take advantage. The difference is that now it's not just you they want to take advantage of, it's Isadora too. The situation became even more serious when the next day Cibele appeared at the house with an official order to assess Isadora's living conditions. Mr. Caldwell, she said with a professional coldness that barely disguised her hostility, I need to make an assessment of the minor's current conditions. I don't understand. Miriam has already done several assessments. Yes, but now I need a second opinion to ensure that everything is being conducted properly. During the assessment, Cibele made critical notes about everything. The house was inadequate for a child with special needs. Ethel was clearly unable to adequately supervise a minor, and Theodore was in health conditions that prevent him from making rational decisions about the child's future. Health conditions, Theodore repeated. I am perfectly lucid. Mr. Caldwell, people in the terminal stage often make emotional and irrational decisions. It's understandable, but it's not the best for the child. It was then that Isadora, who had been listening to the conversation from the bedroom door, appeared in the living room. "Is Uncle Theodore sick?" The silence that followed was embarrassing. It was the first time anyone had mentioned Theodore's illness in front of Isadora, and the direct way Cibele had done it seemed almost cruel. "Isadora," Theodore said softly, kneeling down to get on her level. "Uncle is a little sick, yes, but there are a lot of people taking care of me. Are you going to get better?" The innocent question cut the heart of everyone present. Theodore looked at Ethel, then at Miriam, and finally at Cibele, who observed the scene with an expression that seemed almost satisfied. "I'm going to do the best I can to get better," he said finally, an honest but not completely true answer. After Cibele left, leaving behind an atmosphere of barely disguised threat, the adults gathered to discuss strategies. "She's going to try to force Isadora's transfer to the institution," Miriam said. "And she's going to use my supposed incompetence as justification." "What if you report her scheme?" Theodore suggested. "With what evidence? My word against hers. She's been my supervisor for 5 years. She has an established reputation. Who's going to believe me?" It was Frank who asked the question everyone was thinking. "What if we just run away with Isadora?" "Frank!" Ethel exclaimed. "That would be kidnapping. It wouldn't be kidnapping if Theodore gave me legal guardianship before he died. But he can't give you guardianship officially while the case is being investigated," Miriam explained. It was a legal impasse that seemed to have no solution. With each passing day, Theodore grew weaker. Cibele pressured more for Isadora's transfer, and the options dwindled. "There has to be a way," Theodore murmured. "I can't let them take her." "What if there is?" Ethel said slowly. "But it's a way you're not going to like." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you officially giving up all rights to Isadora, letting her be adopted by a completely different family, far from here, where Cibele can't reach her." The suggestion hit Theodore like a slap in the face. "Give her up?" "After everything we've done. To save her, yes. But then all this effort would have been in vain." "No," Miriam said softly. "All this effort took her out of a situation of abuse and neglect. Even if she doesn't stay with us, she's safe now. That wasn't in vain." It was a perspective that forced Theodore to confront his own motivations. Did he really want what was best for Isadora, or did he want to satisfy his own need for redemption? That night, while Isadora slept in her room, unaware that her future was being decided by adults who were fighting against forces that seemed greater than them, Theodore made a decision that would change everything one last time. He would sell everything, the woodworking shop, his house, all his assets, to create a fund so large that no corrupt institution could resist the temptation to keep Isadora where she was. And if that meant sacrificing the financial future of his own legitimate family, who still didn't know about his illness, so be it. It was a desperate decision from a man who was running out of time and options. And like all desperate decisions, it would bring consequences that he couldn't foresee. The discovery that Theodore had begun to liquidate all his assets came through an angry call from Solange Caldwell, his legitimate wife, on a Tuesday morning. Theodore was in the backyard watching Isadora take care of the sunflowers when the phone rang. "Theodore, what the hell are you doing?" Solange screamed on the other end of the line. "The bank manager called me saying you put the woodworking shop up for sale." Theodore closed his eyes, realizing that the moment he had dreaded had finally arrived. For 5 months he had managed to hide his illness and his obsession with Isadora from his family in São Paulo. "Solange, I can explain." "Explain? Theodore, you're selling our future, our children's future. Why?" "I'm sick, Solange. Very sick." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that Theodore thought she had hung up. "Sick? How?" "Pancreatic cancer. Terminal stage. I have a few months to live." The crying that followed was devastating. Solange cried for him, for the complicated marriage they had had, for the children who would be orphaned, and also for the betrayal of having discovered everything through third parties. Why didn't you tell me? Why am I finding out about this because of a bank account? Because I knew you would try to stop me from doing what I need to do. And what is it that you need to do that is more important than your own family? It was then that Theodore told Solange about Isadora, about how he had found the girl being assaulted, about his desperate desire to protect her, about how this had become his reason for living in recent months. "Theodore, have you completely lost your mind?" Solange exploded when he finished. "You're destroying our family because of a strange child. She's not strange to me. Isn't she, and we are? Your own children are strangers to you?" It was a question for which Theodore didn't have a good answer. Raphael and Lucas, his sons, had become distant teenagers in recent years, more interested in their own lives than in keeping in touch with the father they only saw on weekends. "I'm going to talk to the boys," he said finally. "You're going to say what? That their father is dying and spent their inheritance on a stranger? I'm going to explain. Theodore, if you don't stop this madness right now, I'm going to file a lawsuit to prevent the sale of the assets. I'm going to claim that you're not in a mental condition to make decisions." The threat was real, and Theodore knew it. Solange had legal resources and motivation to fight, and worse still, she would probably win, considering that a terminally ill man spending his entire fortune on a child who had no family relationship really seemed crazy. "Solange, please. Don't give me please. Come home now. Let's resolve this as a family. I can't abandon Isadora." "Then choose, Theodore. Your real family or your morbid obsession." The call ended abruptly, leaving Theodore alone with an impossible decision. From the backyard, Isadora called him. "Uncle Theodore, come see. The sunflowers are sprouting." He joined her, watching the tiny green sprouts beginning to emerge from the soil. "That's lovely, Isadora. You've taken such good care of them. Uncle Frank said that when they get big, they'll follow the sun. Is that true?" "That's true. How do they know where the sun is?" "It's instinct. They're born knowing." Isadora considered this for a moment. "Do I have instinct too?" "Of course you do. And what does my instinct say?" Theodore looked at the 4-year-old girl with her big, curious eyes and felt his heart break. "Your instinct tells you to be happy and safe, always. And will you help me be happy and safe?" The innocent question was like a dagger to Theodore's chest. How could he explain to a child that the people we love sometimes leave, even when we don't want them to? "I'll do everything I can," he promised, knowing it was a promise he might not be able to keep. That afternoon, when Miriam arrived for her weekly visit, she found Theodore visibly shaken. "Did something happen?" "My wife found out about the sale of the company. She's threatening to go to court to stop me." "And can she do that?" "She can, and she probably will. A terminally ill man liquidating all his assets to give to a strange child? It won't be hard to convince a judge that I'm mentally unbalanced." Miriam sat down heavily in a chair. "Theodore, maybe she's right." "What do you mean?" "Maybe you really are unbalanced. Not mentally, but emotionally. Your guilt over Letitia's death is making you make decisions that are hurting everyone." "I'm trying to protect Isadora." "You're trying to protect yourself. From the guilt, the regret, the feeling of having failed as a father." Miriam's words were harsh, but Theodore knew there was truth in them. "And if that's true, does that make my concern for Isadora any less valid?" "No, but it makes your decisions more dangerous." It was at that moment that Ethel came into the room, carrying a letter that had arrived in the mail. "Theodore, this came for you." "It's official." The envelope bore the letterhead of a law firm in Cidade Americana Relevant. Theodore opened it with trembling hands and read the contents in silence, his face paling with each line. "What is it?" Miriam asked. Solange has filed for guardianship. She's claiming that I'm mentally incapacitated due to my terminal illness and asking that a guardian be appointed to manage my assets. Can she do that? She can. And if she succeeds, everything I've planned for Isadora will fall apart. Ethel took the letter from his hands and read it carefully. Theodore, there's something else here. She's also asking that you be committed for psychiatric treatment. The information hit everyone like a lightning bolt. Solange wasn't just trying to protect the family's wealth. She was trying to remove Theodore completely from Isadora's life. They can't do that, Miriam protested. You're lucid, capable of making your own decisions, but a judge might not see it that way. A man with terminal cancer, abandoning his family, spending everything on a strange child. It won't be difficult for them to paint a picture of mental instability. At that moment, Isadora appeared in the doorway, clearly sensing the tension in the air. Are you fighting? No, honey, Ethel said quickly. Just talking about grown-up stuff. Is Uncle Theodore sicker? The child's direct question created an uncomfortable silence. Theodore knelt beside her. Isadora, remember we talked about how sometimes people get sick? I remember. Well, Uncle is a little sicker, and he might need to go to a place where doctors can take better care of me. For how long? I don't know yet. Isadora's eyes filled with tears. And if you leave, who will take care of me? Grandma Ethel and Uncle Frank will take care of you, always. But I want you to take care of me too. I know, honey. I want that too. That night, after Isadora was asleep, the three adults gathered to make a desperate decision. With Solange moving forward with legal action, Cybele pushing for the transfer to the nom d'institution, and Theodore's time running out quickly, there was only one option left. We're going to have to run, Ethel said simply. Run, Miriam repeated. Where to? Far away from here, to a place where no one can find Isadora until all this legal mess is sorted out. That's crazy, Miriam protested. You'd be committing kidnapping. And the alternative is to let them take her to be exploited financially or return her to the system, Ethel retorted. Theodore remained silent for a long time, weighing the options. All of them were bad, but some were worse than others. If we're going to do this, he said finally, it has to be now, before the guardianship is approved and before Cybele gets the transfer. It was a decision that would turn them all into fugitives from justice, but to protect a 4-year-old girl who just wanted to be loved, it might be worth the risk. Where can we go? Ethel asked. I know a place, Theodore said slowly. A farm in upstate New York. It belongs to a distant cousin who doesn't keep in touch with the rest of the family. We can stay there until you die. Ethel finished bluntly, but necessarily. Until I die. And then you decide what to do with Isadora. It was a desperate plan that would require them to abandon everything, home, work, security, to protect a child. But looking at the room where Isadora slept peacefully, surrounded by the drawings she had made of sunflowers and the family she had chosen for herself, they all knew there was no other choice. The escape would begin the next morning, before the world awoke and discovered that they had disappeared. The escape was discovered 3 days after they left Harmony Creek. Aparecida, Gomez received the call from Cybele on a Friday morning, informing her that the house on Rose Lane was empty and that no one knew the whereabouts of Theodore, Ethel, and Isadora. What do you mean they disappeared? Aparecida asked, feeling a mix of anger and worry. They simply vanished. They took everything, clothes, documents, even the plants in the backyard were uprooted. And Miriam? Where is she? Miriam presented a doctor's note claiming extreme stress and requested leave for an indefinite period. Aparecida immediately understood that there was something much more complex happening than a simple kidnapping. Miriam was not the type of person who would abandon a case due to stress unless she was protecting someone. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, on the Nome da Fazenda Adaptado para Algo como Willow Creek Farm in upstate New York, Isadora ran through the pastures, discovering a world completely different from anything she had known. The 200-acre property belonged to Sebastian Caldwell, Theodore's second cousin, a 60-year-old man who lived alone raising cattle and planting corn. "Uncle Sebastian!" Isadora shouted, running after the chickens in the yard. "Why are they running from me?" "Because you're too lively for them, kid." Sebastian laughed, watching the child with a tenderness he hadn't felt in a long time. Sebastian had received Theodore, Ethel, and Isadora without asking questions. He knew his cousin well enough to know that if he had shown up at his farm with a child and an elderly woman running from something, he had serious reasons. But it was during the first week on the farm that Sebastian realized that Theodore was much sicker than he had admitted. The man he remembered as strong and determined was visibly weakened, spending most of his days lying down, taking medications that clearly weren't controlling his pain. "Theodore," he said one afternoon as they watched Isadora play with the calves, "you're dying, aren't you?" "I am." "How long?" "Weeks, maybe. The doctor said the trip here would probably accelerate the process." "And does the girl know?" "No. We haven't had the courage to tell her yet." Sebastian watched Isadora, who was trying to teach a little calf to follow a rope. "She's going to suffer a lot when you're gone." "She will, but at least she'll suffer in a place where she's loved and protected." "And then? What happens to her after you die?" It was the question that haunted Theodore every day. "Ethel will take care of her." "And Frank?" "Frank." It was then that Theodore realized that Frank hadn't come with them. In the rush of the escape, he had been left behind, promising to catch up with them in a few days. But a week had passed, and there was no news from him. "He said he would come," Theodore murmured, a new worry settling in his heart. Back in Harmony Creek, Frank was facing his own crisis. Theodore's sudden departure had left him alone to deal with the authorities, who now saw him as a possible accomplice in Isadora's disappearance. "Mr. Peterson," Aparecida said during a formal interrogation at the police station, "where is the child?" "I don't know. Don't know or don't want to say." "I don't know. Theodore didn't tell me where they were going." "But you knew they were going to run." Frank hesitated. Lying to a prosecutor was a crime, but confessing that he knew about the escape would make him an accomplice. "I knew that Theodore was worried about the threats of commitment. And you thought it was normal for him to kidnap a child?" "It wasn't kidnapping. Theodore is protecting Isadora." "From what?" "From people who want to take advantage of her." Aparecida leaned forward. "Are you referring to Cibele Martins?" The question caught Frank off guard. "Do you know about her scheme?" "I'm investigating. That's why I need to find Isadora as soon as possible. As long as she's missing, I can't officially protect her." It was then that Frank made a decision that would change everything. "If I tell you where I suspect they are, do you guarantee that Isadora won't be sent to the Nom de Institution?" "I guarantee that I will do everything in my power to protect her." "And Ethel? What happens to her?" "It depends on the circumstances. If she cooperates, and if Isadora is well cared for, I can be flexible regarding the charges of fraud." Frank remained silent for a long time, struggling between loyalty to Theodore and what he believed was best for Isadora. Theodore mentioned a farm in upstate New York, a cousin named Sebastian. It was enough information for Aparecida to locate Willow Creek Farm in a few hours. But instead of immediately mobilizing the police, she made an unusual decision. She would travel to upstate New York alone to personally assess the situation. "Why alone?" her assistant asked. "It's a kidnapping case." "Because," Aparecida replied, "I suspect that when I get there, I'll find a family taking care of a child, not kidnappers exploiting a victim." Aparecida's trip to upstate New York took place 3 days later. She arrived at Willow Creek Farm on a Sunday morning, finding a scene that confirmed her suspicions. Isadora was in the pasture helping Sebastian feed the calves, laughing and running with a freedom she had never shown in Harmony Creek. Ethel was on the porch of the main house, watching her granddaughter with a serene smile that contrasted with the constant tension she'd always carried. And Theodore. Theodore was visibly closer to death, but there was a peace in his eyes that Aparecida had never seen before. "Dr. Gomez," he said when he saw her approach, "I was expecting you." "You were?" "I knew that sooner or later you would find us. The question was how much time I would have before that happened. And did you have enough time?" Theodore looked at Isadora, who had noticed the prosecutor's presence and was running towards them. "I think so." "Aunt Aparecida!" Isadora shouted, using the respectful term she gave to all adult women. "Did you come to see our farm?" "I did. Are you enjoying living here?" "A lot. There are animals and plants, and Uncle Sebastian is teaching me to ride a horse." Aparecida knelt down to be at the girl's level. "And do you miss Harmony Creek?" Isadora thought for a moment. "I miss Uncle Frank, but it's cooler here. I can run without anyone hurting me." The child's innocent answer revealed more about her previous situation than any official report could. That afternoon, Aparecida spoke at length with all the adults. Sebastian confirmed that Isadora was being well cared for, that she had gained weight, and that she demonstrated an emotional development that was impressive for a child with her history. "Does she have nightmares?" Aparecida asked Ethel. "Not since we got here. For the first time in her life, she sleeps through the night without waking up scared. And Theodore, how is she coping with his illness? She knows he's sick, but she doesn't fully understand what that means. I think it's better that way." It was during a private conversation with Theodore that Aparecida realized the true extent of the sacrifice he had made. "You abandoned your family, your business, your entire life for this child." "I didn't abandon. I chose." "There's a difference. And you don't regret it?" Theodore looked out the window where Isadora was teaching Sebastian how to make paper airplanes. "My whole life, I've always made decisions based on what was convenient, what was safe, what was expected of me. This was the first time I made a decision based solely on what was right, even knowing it would cost you everything, especially knowing it would cost me everything." It was an answer that touched Aparecida more deeply than she expected. Here was a man who had literally sacrificed everything, family, fortune, reputation, to protect a child who wasn't even his. "Theodore, I need to know. What do you want to happen to Isadora after you pass away?" "I want her to stay with people who love her. If it's Ethel and Frank, great. If it's a foster family that you choose, as long as it's good for her, I'll accept it too. And if it's necessary to choose between what's best for her and what you want, choose what's best for her. Always." It was an answer that showed that, despite all the complexities of his motivations, Theodore had finally found a genuine way to love. A love that was willing to sacrifice itself for the well-being of the loved one. That night, while Isadora slept peacefully for the first time in months without knowing that her future was being decided, Aparecida made a decision that would define the fate of everyone involved. Aparecida's decision was announced on a clear Tuesday morning during a meeting that included all the adults responsible for Isadora. The girl was in the pasture with Sebastian, unaware that the prosecutor's next words would define her destiny. "After carefully evaluating the situation," Aparecida began, "I have decided that Isadora will remain here on the farm for the next 2 months under direct court supervision." The relief on Ethel's face was visible, but Theodore frowned. "Only 2 months? Theodore, you have 2 weeks, maybe 3, according to your medical condition. I need to use this time to organize a permanent solution for Isadora." "What kind of solution?" "A pre-approved foster family that can offer long-term stability." "No!" exclaimed Ethel. "She's staying with me." "Mrs. Davis, With all due respect, you are 67 years old and have committed document fraud. I cannot formalize guardianship under these circumstances." "What about Frank?" Theodore asked. "He was willing to adopt her. Frank has a criminal record and a history of alcoholism. 2 weeks of sobriety don't erase years of problems." It was Sebastian who asked the question that no one had considered. What if I adopted her? The silence that followed was total. Aparecida studied the farmer's face, looking for signs that he was serious. "Mr. Caldwell, you are 60 years old. You are single. You have lived alone for decades. Why would you want to adopt a 4-year-old child?" "Because," Sebastian paused, looking out the window where Isadora was trying to convince a calf to follow her. "Because this farm has been very quiet since my sister died, and because that girl brought life back to this place. Raising a child is much more complex than having company," Aparecida warned. "I know, but look at her here. She is happy, healthy, safe, and I have learned to love her as if she were my granddaughter." It was a proposal that no one had anticipated, but that made sense in a strange way. Sebastian had the resources to take care of Isadora. The farm offered a healthy and safe environment, and more importantly, he had developed a genuine connection with the girl. "You would have to undergo a complete evaluation," Aparecida said. "Medical exams, psychological exams, background checks. I accept all of that. And you would have to accept that Ethel is part of Isadora's life, as a grandmother, even without legal ties. Of course, Mrs. Davis can live here on the farm for as long as she wants." Theodore felt an intense emotion rise in his chest. Perhaps there was a solution that would allow Isadora to stay with people who truly loved her, in a place where she was happy. "Aparecida," he said, "could this work?" "It could, but it would have to be formalized quickly, and it would depend on Sebastian passing all the evaluations." It was at that moment that Isadora came running into the house, all covered in dirt and radiant with joy. "Uncle Sebastian, Chocolate followed me here." Chocolate was a calf that she had adopted as a pet. Sebastian smiled, carefully wiping the dirt from her face. "He likes you, kiddo. Animals know how to recognize good people. And can I take care of him forever? If you want to, you can." Isadora looked around, noticing the tension of the adults. "Are you deciding if I'm going to stay here?" The child's direct question caught everyone off guard. Aparecida knelt beside her. "Isadora, would you like to live here on the farm with Uncle Sebastian and Grandma Ethel?" "Forever? Forever? And Uncle Theodore, will he stay too?" The silence that followed was painful. Theodore approached and hugged Isadora with what little strength he had left. "Isadora, remember we talked about how sometimes people get very sick?" "I remember. Uncle is getting so sick that he will need to go to a place where there can't be the noise of children playing. But will you get better and come back?" Theodore looked at Ethel, at Sebastian, at Aparecida, seeking strength to say what needed to be said. "No, honey. When people get sick like Uncle is, they don't get better. They go to a special place in heaven." Isadora's eyes filled with tears. "Like my mum? Like your mum? And will I be alone again?" "No," said Sebastian, kneeling beside Theodore. "You will never be alone again. Grandma Ethel and I will take care of you always. Promise?" "I promise." Isadora hugged Theodore first, then Sebastian, and finally Ethel. It was as if, at 4 years old, she intuitively understood that she was gaining a family at the same time as she was losing someone she loved. "Uncle Theodore," she said, "when you go to heaven, can you tell my mum that I'm okay?" The question broke the hearts of everyone present. Theodore held back the tears with all the strength he could muster. "I will. Yes. And I'll tell her that you have a family who loves you very much." In the following 2 weeks, a strange but comforting routine was established on the farm. Theodore spent the mornings with Isadora, telling stories and teaching her to read simple words. Sebastian dedicated himself to getting to know better the girl who was about to become his adopted daughter. and Ethel prepared herself for the role of official grandmother in a family that no one had planned, but that had formed naturally. The evaluations for the adoption ran with unusual speed. Aparecida had used all her influence to accelerate the process. Recognizing that time was a critical factor, Sebastian passed all the medical and psychological exams, demonstrating not only physical and mental capacity to care for a child, but also a genuine motivation based on love. It was on a Sunday morning that Theodore woke up knowing that the end had come. The pain had become constant, and he could barely get out of bed. He asked to speak to Isadora alone. "My dear," he said, holding her little hand, "Uncle is going to travel today. To heaven. To heaven. Will you feel pain there?" "No, there is no pain in heaven. And will you be able to see us from here?" "I will. Whenever you look at the sunflowers, remember that Uncle is watching you take care of them." Isadora nodded solemnly, as if she understood the gravity of the moment. "Uncle Theodore, thank you for saving me. Thank you for saving me too. I saved you. You saved me. You taught me that there was still time to do the right thing." Theodore died that afternoon as the sun set over the farm and Isadora played in the pasture with Chocolate, unaware that she was saying goodbye to the man who had changed her life forever. The funeral was simple, held in the small church in the neighboring town. Sebastian, Ethel, Isadora, Aparecida, and to everyone's surprise, Frank, who had traveled from Harmony Creek to say goodbye to the man who had given him a second chance, attended. "He was good," Isadora said to Frank after the ceremony. "Even when he was sick, he took care of me." "He was very good," Frank agreed. "And now you're going to be very happy here, aren't you?" "I will. And will you come visit us?" "I will, yes. Whenever I can." It was a promise that Frank would keep religiously for the next few years, becoming a constant presence in Isadora's life, not as a father, but as a beloved uncle who had helped her plant her first sunflowers. 6 months later, Isadora Caldwell Santos, her new legal name after the adoption, ran through the pastures of the farm like a child, completely different from the one who had been found suffering in the Harmony Creek town square. Her eyes sparkled with confidence. Her laughter echoed freely through the air, and she had developed a curious and caring personality that charmed everyone who knew her. Sebastian, now officially her father, discovered that raising a child at 60 was challenging but also rewarding in ways he had never imagined. Ethel found the peace she had been seeking for decades on the farm and a chance to be a grandmother without the weight of extreme poverty. And Isadora grew up knowing that she had been loved by many different people, each contributing uniquely to her salvation. She kept the sunflower drawings she had made when she still lived with Theodore, now framed in the farm's room, as a reminder that even in the most difficult situations, love can flourish and transform lives. The last great revelation was yet to come, but for now, a 4-year-old girl finally knew what it was to be truly happy and safe. 2 years had passed since Theodore's death, and life on Willow Creek Farm had found a perfect rhythm. Isadora, now 6 years old, had grown into a vibrant and intelligent girl who helped Sebastian with the animals and studied with a private teacher who came from the town 3 times a week. It was on a morning in March that the last great revelation arrived through a registered letter addressed to Sebastian. The sender was a law firm in Cidade Americana Relevant, the same one that had represented Solange Caldwell during the last months of Theodore's life. "What could it be?" Ethel asked, watching Sebastian carefully open the envelope. Sebastian read the letter in silence, his expression gradually changing from curiosity to surprise, and finally to something that looked like disbelief. "Sebastian, what happened?" Ethel insisted. "It's about Theodore, about his will." "What will?" "I thought his wife had contested everything. She contested what she knew, but apparently Theodore made a second secret will a few days before he died, and it has just been validated by the court. Ethel sat down heavily on the kitchen chair. And what does this will say? Sebastian continued reading, his voice faltering slightly. He left everything to Isadora. Not everything he had, but everything he managed to save from Solange's lawsuits. How much is everything? According to the letter, approximately $2 million in investments that Solange never knew existed. Theodore had created an offshore company years ago and transferred this money there before he got sick. The magnitude of the revelation left Ethel speechless. Theodore had managed to protect a significant fortune for Isadora even after his death. But there's more, Sebastian continued. The will includes a personal letter to be read when Isadora turns 18 and specific instructions on how the money should be used. What kind of instructions? Education, health, and when she turns 25, she can use it freely for whatever she wants. But until then, only for essential needs and to help other children in vulnerable situations. It was typical of Theodore. Even after death, he still tried to ensure that his fortune was used to protect needy children. Sebastian, Ethel said slowly, does this change anything for us? It changes everything and changes nothing. Isadora will have financial security for life, but she's still our girl. The money only confirms what we already knew, that Theodore loved her as if she were his daughter. At that moment, Isadora came running into the kitchen, as covered in dirt as always, holding a kitten she had found in the barn. "Father Sebastian, Grandma Ethel, look what I found. Can I keep it?" Sebastian and Ethel exchanged glances, still processing the news of the will. Isadora was officially one of the richest children in the state, but all she wanted was to take care of an abandoned kitten. "Of course you can, my daughter," Sebastian said, hugging her with the kitten and everything. "What are you going to call him?" "Theodore," she replied without hesitation, "in honor of the uncle who saved me." The simplicity and purity of the answer touched the two adults deeply. Even after 2 years, Isadora kept alive the memory of the man who had changed her life. That afternoon, after Isadora went out to play with her new kitten, Sebastian and Ethel talked about the implications of the inheritance. "Do we need to tell her?" Ethel asked. "About the money? Not yet. She's too young to understand what it means. But when she grows up, yes, she needs to know that Theodore never forgot her. And if that changes the way she sees us? What if she thinks we only took care of her because of the money?" Sebastian thought carefully before answering. "Ethel, look at her. Look how happy she is, how much she trusts us, how much she loves this simple life we've built. Money won't change who she is inside." They were right. Isadora grew up on the farm without knowing about her inheritance, developing simple and solid values. She helped with the animals, studied diligently, and demonstrated a natural compassion for any living being that needed help. It was at the age of 10 that she herself discovered about the will by chance, when she overheard a phone conversation between Sebastian and the lawyer responsible for managing the funds. "Dad," she asked that night, "what is a trust fund?" Sebastian almost dropped the glass of milk he was drinking. "Why are you asking that? I heard you talking on the phone about a trust fund with my name." It was time to tell the truth. Sebastian and Ethel sat down with Isadora on the porch of the house, watching the sun set over the pastures, and told her about the inheritance that Theodore had left her. "Does that mean I'm rich?" she asked, trying to process the information. "Yes, you are," Sebastian confirmed. "But that doesn't change who you are or how we love you. And can I use the money to help other boys and girls like I was? When you grow up, yes, that's exactly what Theodore wanted." Isadora remained silent for a long time, rocking in the rocking chair that Sebastian had made for her. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "If I didn't have this money, would you still love me the same?" "Isadora," said Ethel, approaching and hugging her granddaughter, "we loved you long before we knew you had any money, and we will love you forever, rich or poor." "Then it's okay," The money can stay put until I know exactly how to help other children." It was an answer that was too mature for a 10-year-old girl, but perfectly consistent with the character she had developed. The following years brought more revelations about the lasting impact of Theodore's actions. Cybele Martins had been investigated and convicted of corruption, losing her job and being forced to compensate the government for the damages caused. The San Vicente Institute was closed, and several children who were being financially exploited were relocated to suitable families. Miriam, who had returned to work after her leave, became one of the leading reformers of the child protection system in the region, using her experience from the Isadora case to implement stricter protocols against the exploitation of minors. Frank fulfilled his promise to visit regularly, becoming a beloved presence in Isadora's life. He had remained sober all these years and had become a respected social worker, helping other families in vulnerable situations. And Aparecida? Aparecida used the case as an example at national child protection conferences, demonstrating how courageous and unconventional decisions were sometimes necessary to save a child. When Isadora turned 18, she finally received the personal letter that Theodore had written to her. Sitting on the same porch where she had discovered her inheritance 8 years earlier, she read the words that a dying man had written especially for her. "My dearest Isadora, if you are reading this letter, it means that you have grown into the wonderful young woman that I always knew you would become. I hope that you have been happy, that you have felt loved, and that you have never forgotten that you are worth much more than any money I left for you. When I saw you being assaulted in that town square, I wasn't just saving you, you were saving me too. You taught me that it is never too late to do the right thing, even when it costs everything we have. Use this money to make a difference in the lives of other children like you. Not because it is an obligation, but because I know that your generous heart will want to do this naturally. And remember, you were not saved because of the money. You were saved because you deserve to be loved and protected, just as all children deserve. With all my love and admiration, Theodore." That night, at 18 years old, Isadora made a decision that would change many lives. She would use part of her inheritance to create a foundation dedicated to protecting children in vulnerable situations, offering not only financial resources, but carefully selected temporary families and specialized psychological support. The Theodore Caldwell Foundation was inaugurated 2 years later in a simple but moving ceremony held at Willow Creek Farm itself. Sebastian, Ethel, Frank, Miriam, Aparecida, and 24 children who had been helped in the first months of operation were present. "My uncle Theodore taught me that saving a child is not just taking her out of danger," Isadora said during her inaugural speech. "It's giving her a family, love, hope, and the chance to grow up knowing that she is valuable. That is what we are going to do here. Create families where love is more important than blood." And that is how a 4-year-old girl who had suffered on the streets of a small town in upstate New York became the guardian of hope for hundreds of other children. Her suffering had turned into purpose, her pain into healing for others, and her salvation into a legacy of love that would multiply for generations. On the farm where she had grown up happily, surrounded by people who loved her unconditionally, Isadora continued to plant sunflowers every year. And when the flowers grew tall and strong, following the sun across the sky, she knew that somewhere Theodore was smiling, knowing that he had done the right thing.